Gameranx presents another episode of Before You Buy, the show where we give you some straight up gameplay and some of my thoughts on the latest games releasing. It's me, Jake Baldino, and today we're talking about The Surge. This game, for those of you that don't know, seeing as it hasn't really been a hugely hyped thing or anything, it's essentially a Dark Souls style sci-fi game. Dark Souls clones have seemingly been the new thing, but I had my eye on this one just because it's from the folks behind Lords of the Fallen. If you remember, that was a Dark Souls game that wasn't half bad, at least for me. But in The Surge, you're in a far less fantastical world. This time it's like a world ruled by a giant megacorp promising to save civilization from wars and famine and global warming disasters and stuff, and you just play as some random generic dude named Warren, who I might add you can't customize. But he's signing up for a new job with the mega corporation Creo, and then after that you choose your exoskeleton to work with, either a heavy or a light one, and then of course because it's a video game, suddenly everything goes wrong and you wake up with your circuits fried, an exoskeleton just bound to you, and you're in a disaster-filled mega facility complex with killer robots and killer people that you have to kill. In a lot of the combat, and definitely a lot of the level structure, the game is unabashedly a Dark Souls gameplay clone. Combat is deliberate and really freaking challenging with limited stamina. You have a spawn base to return to and spend points in craft, and you know, you've heard this by now, if you die while you're out farming souls, or here they're called tech scrap, you have the option of tracking them down and getting them back. What I do like though is that The Surge adds a bit more challenge to getting your souls back by limiting you finding and tracking them down and getting them back with a time limit. And all the challenge of the game makes The Surge immensely satisfying. This genre works for a reason. Every area feels like a dangerous trek you slowly trudge through, learning all the little ins and outs, dodging the enemies that hide in corners and pop out at you, and then busting ass and unlocking those shortcuts to get to new areas quicker. That sci-fi, almost slightly sci-fi horror-esque vibe really, and I mean really, makes it stand out and feel different enough from other similar games it's based on. I gotta emphasize that. The combat itself, I think, is varied enough. You're agile, but at the same time, very slow since you're wearing basically a power loader from Aliens. Combat and pacing feels closer to Bloodborne than Dark Souls, I will say that. Meaning for the uninitiated, it's a bit faster, revolving around aggressive dodging. There is a block button here, but I found myself using it only in very specific situations. I almost wish the game emphasized and fleshed out blocking a little bit more, instead of just throwing it as a necessity at the later end of the game. But what are you gonna do when dodging is so much more useful? Here you can target specific body parts and it gives an added element of strategy, not just for taking advantage of unarmored weak spots, but if you see gear you like on an enemy, if you damage that part enough, and then you pull off a pretty awesomely animated finisher, then you can potentially clean slice that limb or part off, and that gives you components to craft that specific part yourself. The strategy and real pursuit of crafting that stuff works great, and the varied and I think well-framed execution finishers are the icing on the cake, man. They just really work well, and that limb targeting means you rely on lock-on much more, which I will say, when you fight more than one enemy at once, that quickly becomes a bit of an issue. Although there is lock-on switching, it does take some getting used to, so be prepared. The weapon variety and upgrades are nice too. You can wield massive chunky swords, chainsaws, big electric power poles, a giant staff, a big axe hammer thing, claws, and a bunch of other things. It's all pretty tough, and you can die quick, but you'll have fun doing it, and especially while exploring. The first area starts off pretty ho-hum, but once you get into the more intense stuff and more enemy types, it becomes a big boy game, and it gets pretty damn awesome. From this gameplay in the video, it might look like more generic, boring factory sci-fi stuff, but it manages to stay surprisingly varied throughout. Every area has all these different landmarks and tons of nooks and crannies, and it all looks pretty great, although this footage is recorded on PC. And after a quick dive into the PS4 version, it seems pretty competent too, with different PS4 Pro modes. But back to the systems, crafting is really nicely balanced between being completely necessary for success and not being overly complicated at the same time. It does give you a nice amount of control though, and it's refreshing to piece like individually status chunks of armor onto yourself. It just feels good in terms of progression. It ties in nicely with leveling up, which works a little bit differently. The equipment gives you most of your stat boosts. Leveling up your general self is like upgrading your power supply on a computer. It gives you more usable power points to stack on more and better equipment and implants. The implants are important because they're like active and passive perks, and the usable perks give you temporary buffs and heals, but later on they get way more complicated and interesting, allowing you to do stuff like slow time or absorb health, while at the cost of spending other meters. One issue I will say, I wish there were more bosses. The boss battles are pretty strong, but also have ways to defeat them that are pretty damn difficult to figure out. You know, playing this game 2 weeks before it released with no helps or tips had me really puzzled in parts because stuff isn't translated well, but figuring it out felt good and satisfying. I just really wish there were more bosses. The story is also pretty unfulfilling. It starts off simple and vague enough to create a reason for proceeding and seeking answers to questions, and I was into that, but not much is really fulfilled or capitalized on it, and it's definitely not mind-blowing stuff. It doesn't help, it's hard to care about the main character too. I was totally excited with the starting setup, but it never got too much of that feeling after. It's all clearly about gameplay and stuff here. I will say though that the mystery of what the hell exactly is going on in this facility does make for some good, dreadful, mysterious sci-fi atmosphere. I think where the game lacks in story, it does have decent atmosphere. But I also wish it was a bit longer. You're going to be spending roughly like 30 hours on the campaign, depending on your comfort level with these types of games, and well, honestly, just how good you are. But worth noting, there's also a new Game Plus mode. That's pretty nice. So while The Surge isn't as groundbreaking or memorable or innovative as the other games that really kickstarted this whole new genre, I will say that it does still manage to be refreshing and interesting enough. It's absolutely not perfect, but I think if you are a fan of this challenging action RPG genre that we don't really have a name for yet, I absolutely recommend The Surge. You should give it a try. It's a lot of fun, and I absolutely really loved my time with it. There's going to be flaws, but I think you're going to have a good time just because it does feel different enough. But that's how a Before You Buy works. You know the deal. I give you some pros, some cons, and some personal opinion thrown in, but now I definitely want to hear yours down in the comments. If you have been playing this game, I want to know what you think, but if you haven't, I really want to know the outsider's perspective, just looking at the gameplay. What are your thoughts on it? If you have been playing though, let me know your favorite weapon and armor combinations, because stuff gets really interesting later on in the game. I'll be down in the comments talking to you guys, answering any questions, but if you have more questions or hate mail, send them to me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Jake Baldino as well. But if you had a good time with this video and you like our Before You Buys, clicking the like button helps me out a ton and we really appreciate it. But subscribing if you're new is also a good idea because we put out videos every single day. But as always, thanks for watching and we'll see you guys next time.